So hello everybody, I'm Andrew, I'm a solutions specialist at Kaa IoT and I will be your host today. Before we start with the practical part, I'd like to say a few words about our IAM solution in general. So initially designed as an SaaS product for companies utilizing IoT, Kaa IAM is also perfectly suitable for companies of different sizes working in diverse areas, not even necessarily IoT. These vary from large-scale enterprises to emerging startups that need a solution for the data security via authentication, combined with the high granularity of permission management. Kaa IAM is already available for on-premise deployment, which you can use to try features that Kaa IAM empowers you with. For Kaa Cloud, IAM has yet to be deployed. It has the following features: integrated authentication authorization, granular user and resources access management, user permission presets, the ability to run a product for multiple applications, and auth zero and keycloak integrations. So, Kaa IAM will help you deploy to more quicker and protect the security of your data. So, please stay tuned for more updates. As for industries, our IAM application is broad, so we're seeing a lot of interest from a wide array of areas, but particularly from industrial and manufacturing companies. It needs to be said that the authentication and authorization issues are very sensitive, and especially when there's a lot of devices or multiple functions and forms, and also multiple products and access levels, especially companies that use external development teams. As it's vital for companies like that to achieve quick code rollout, at the same time, they absolutely need to cover the security. So the ability to apply permission preset categories can really be a saver for these kinds of businesses. Okay, so let's start with the basics and go for generic IAM entities. First things first, Kaa IAM will be available for all cloud users, Kaa Cloud users soon. And in the meantime, we're rolling out to custom client solutions, and we have a team member available if you want to dive in and explore it for your business. User management is available in the cloud, and resources management should be rolled out in the near future. I should say that Kaa Cloud also migrates its authorization to IAM step by step. It's already pre-integrated with IAM, but this process isn't complete just yet. For now, only user and group management is integrated with IAM, and you cannot manage permissions for cornerstone Kaa resources like endpoints, applications, dashboards, etc. via IAM. This part is still manageable though by open source system, Keycloak. However, full integration is already available for Kaa-hosted and self-hosted plans. We'll see that integration in action later during the demo part. In the cloud, Kaa IAM can really be really useful for enterprise and small businesses that want to be more forward-thinking when it comes to IoT security. Some essential features are already available to all cloud users, like permissions revoke, but some are yet to be rolled out. So now, if you don't mind, I'd like to go into a little bit more detail about identity access management. First of all, why would companies need it? So let's imagine that the company produces HVAC, that's heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. The company manufactures this equipment. It's already pre-integrated with sensors and controlling devices, which connect to the internet, making the whole HVAC system smart. When buying these systems, customers get the equipment together with a mobile app and portal giving them access to data 24/7. So far, we've only seen two types of entities, manufacturing companies and the end consumer. And so the solution seems simple. But things get complicated when the third, fourth, fifth, and so on entities come into play. Imagine that we also have another company which is local to the customer and is responsible for the HVAC maintenance, such as changing its filters regularly. Then we have another company that, let's say, is responsible for maintenance of the outdoor units, and so on and so forth. As you see, now we have many types of entities, and then it just keeps on getting more and more complicated. But as a HVAC manufacturer, you don't want to actually rewrite the permission management system every time a new type of entity emerges. And that's where the Kaa IAM comes into play. IAM enables manufacturing companies to flexibly update the permission topology in a matter of simple configuration updates in UI without a need for the re-implementation of the whole system. Secondly, IAM provides full auditing of all actions taken by users. So admins can quickly take some time and see who's changed what and in what way. Thirdly, companies can fine-tune the access control starting from individual resources or even some specific piece or type of data that's attributed to that resource, all the way up to sub-organizations, departments, regions, and so on. This is only a part of a challenge that companies face when it comes to security, but there are also other critical issues that require attention, like multi-factor authentication, identity federation, etc. Initially, IAM was introduced by AWS and Google as these companies faced the problem of managing access to their services and resources. And now, given time, the same concept is being applied to real-world assets. Now let's move. With that in mind, let's move on to Kaa IAM and how it can help the companies we gave an example earlier. The main Kaa IAM residence is policy. Policy is what enables users to granularly grant permissions to resources and follow the well-known security principle called least privilege permissions. It states that you must grant only those permissions that are required to perform a specific task. Nothing more, nothing less. Following this principle, you can ensure that in case of malicious impersonation of that user was granted with the least privileged permissions, only the smallest blast scope can actually happen in a worst case scenario. So coming back to the policy is just a small JSON document that defines who and what can do or can't do on a specific resource or set of resources. Despite the fact that the Kaa IAM provides a UI with a policy constructor, even people without knowledge in programming can read and understand the policy by taking a look at its raw JSON format. But firstly, let's talk about two types of policies and understand the difference between them. The first type is called identity-based policy. It manages identity, user or group, can have various principles attached and defines what this identity can do. The second type is called a resource-based policy. It's attached to the resource and defines who and what can do on the attached resource. Each resource can be attached to only one resource-based policy, while identities are not limited to the number of policies that they can be attached to. To better understand when you use each policy type, imagine that you're the administrator of the HVAC solution, and you need to define permissions for a local service company that's responsible for maintaining all installed HVAC systems in a specific region. There are a lot of HVAC systems in that region, and the company itself has its own rotation of employees, and you, as an administrator, decide to manage all user permissions with the help of resource-based policies. Every time a new HVAC system is installed in that region, you will need to update resource-based policy associated with that HVAC system with principals that need access to that resources. Now, as you can imagine, that's not exactly convenient, right? So let's now think about what the flow would look like if instead you decide to go with identity-based policies. In that case, you create a policy per each company department specifying the department's unique identification as a principal and HVAC systems identification in that region as a resource. For specifying all regions, HVAC systems, you will use a wildcard. So we'll handle the case when new HVAC is installed in that region. Much more convenient, right? You define permissions once and all future cases are handled automatically despite the employee rotation or new HVAC systems coming and going in that region. But the question still exists. When do we need resource-based policies? There are cases when you explicitly need to allow or deny access to specific resources. Say you need assistance from the Kaa IoT support team to resolve some issue with one device. In that case, you follow the previously mentioned least privilege permissions principle and use resource-based policy to grant access to only that specific resource. Also, take a note that IAM automatically creates resource-based policy for each created resource. Finally, to be sure that you fully understand the difference between resource-based and policy-based policies, take a look at the defined permissions for Alice, Bob, and Charlie. Here, Alice can read, update, delete resource X, can read but cannot update resource Y, and has no access to resource Q, as she neither has identity-based policy for resource Q, nor is she listed as a principal in the resource-based policy for Q. Bob can perform all operations on resource X, can perform all except update operations on resource Y, and can read resource Q. Charlie, on the other hand, can read resource Q and has no access to either resource X or resource Q. Well, we saw from the above example allow and deny verbs in policy definitions. Now let's overview the role they play in the policy evaluation phase. By default, IAM actually denies access to any protected resource unless it encounters a policy that explicitly allows the operation. It means that an allow decision is made only if there is a matching allow policy and no matching deny policies. So, working with policies in the environment of a small, medium or large enterprise, you need to operate with ID since each resource and principal, user or group, has to be somehow referenced by policy. These IDs have a special format and are called Kaa Resource Names or simply KRN. Let's briefly take a look at the KRN structure so that you feel at ease during the demo part when we will actually tackle the KRN. KRN uniquely references resource or principal, but at the same time it can end with the asterisk or simply wildcard, in which case it references all resources or principal with the same prefix. Let's have a look at some examples of KRNs. If you look at number 1, this KRN references user Alice. At number 2, this KRN references Kaa endpoint that has the following ID. And number 3, this KRN references all Kaa endpoints in this tenant. So if you're planning to apply IAM structure to your company's resources ecosystem, KRN has the following structure that you're seeing now on the screen. Let's go into a little bit more detail about it. KRN is a static prefix used to visually identify KRNs among other identifier strings. Resource server is a resource server that owns a resource. Tenant ID is a tenant ID where referenced resource lives. Resource type is a referenced resource type. Resource path is a resource path that reflects the logical location of a resource in an organizational structure and it's optional. And resource ID on resource server is an ID that uniquely identifies a resource in the scope of a resource server. Okay, so to wrap up the theoretical block, let's overview the policy structure. What you're seeing now is how a resource-based policy looks, and what you're seeing now is how the identity-based policy looks. As you can see, resource-based and policy-based policy structures are almost identical except for two things. Policy names and resources field presence in identity-based policy and its absence in the resource-based policy. Let's start with names. Resource-based policy has a name that is assigned automatically by IAM for each created resource, and this name is KRN that uniquely identifies resources. In the meantime, identity-based policy has a user-defined name. Type represents policy type, resource stands for resource-based, and identity for identity-based. Description stands for human-readable policy description. Statements, this is where the actual policy logic resides. There can be one or more entries in the statements array. Each individual statement has the effect, action, principles, description, and resources if it's identity-based policy. Effect says whether the policy must give positive or negative outcomes during the evaluation phase. Actions lists possible actions on protected resource. Principles lists principles that the policy relates to, which can be users or groups. Resources lists resources that policy relates to. As you'll already know, it's present in identity-based policies only. This policy structure can be applied to virtually any company or solution, regardless of whether a company has multiple projects or applications running, or scales from 1 to thousands or even millions of users. So, for the demo, we've created a hypothetical HVAC manufacturing company with the following structure you're seeing on the screen. Here, the HVAC manufacturer is a top-level identity with administrative privileges and all child entities. These are the air and conditioning and heating departments on the next level, each having broad admin users. Also, AC and heating departments both have their own units, application development and support. Coming back to the top-level entity, which is HVAC manufacturer, among the departments has 2 installation companies, one in Kyiv and one in New York. To handle this organizational structure, we've used user directories and resource paths. We already talked about resource paths during KRN overview. Here we face a user directory term for the first time, but don't be afraid, they're implemented on top of KRN's resource paths and have such a name only because it's used in context. To speed up the webinar, we've already pre-configured the mentioned structure with all the needed endpoints, applications, and users in our tenant. So let's enter the tenant under the top level admin, and you can see the tenant ID on your screen. And then quickly overview the configuration. You go to user management, then users. And here you can manage users in all units. As you can see, we've already created users per each unit in our organizational structure. Next, click on user heating-dev-user1. Here we see the user directive that represents the logical location of user in the system. In this case, it's heating dev, meaning it belongs to the application department unit of the heating department. Now let's move on to the page where user permissions are managed. Go to user management and then click policies. With the help of policies, we implemented the scenario where each unit user has access only to those endpoints that belong to the same administrative unit. At the same time, elements of hired units have access to underlying units endpoints. So let's take a look at one of the policies that defines permission for endpoints for a support unit of a heating department. Expand all actions and heating support endpoints policy. Click the JSON view and you will see the following text. Here we see heating support resource path coming after the resource type endpoint in a resource KRN, and the same heating support after the user resource type in the principal KRN. So what this policy says is that users under the heating support asterisk user directory can do any action on all endpoints having the heating support asterisk resource path. Now, let's expand the admin policy of the heating department. Click on expand all actions on heating endpoints policy and click on the JSON view. You will see the following. Here, users under the heating admin asterisk user directory can do any action on endpoint having the heating asterisk resource path. And our scenario includes endpoints under the heating dev asterisk, heating support asterisk, and heating asterisk paths, which represent application development, support units of the heating department, as well as the department itself. So let's log in under users and admins of different levels to see how everything works.
Firstly, we would like to log in under the user from the support unit of the hearing department and check available endpoints. Log in under the hearing support user 1-1234 user. Go to Device Management, Devices, and then choose HVAC Demo App. So right now there's only one available endpoint for that user, having the name, which has the name Hearing Support Device 1. Secondly, let's log in under the user from the application development unit of the same heating department and check available endpoints. Log in under the heating-dev-user 1/1234 user. Go to Device Management and Devices and choose the HVAC Demo App. There are two available endpoints for our user with the names Hearing Dev Device 1 and Hearing Dev Device 2. So as we see, users being on the same level of the organizational tree have endpoints that don't intersect with each other. Now let's have a view from the perspective of the hearing department admin. Log in under hearing-admin 1/1234 user. Go to Device Management, Devices, and then choose HVAC Demo App. We can see for all endpoints from the underlying support and application development units, Hearing Support Device 1, Hearing Dev Device 1, and Hearing Dev Device 2, and we don't see any endpoints from the air conditioning department. The same model applies to the air conditioning department structure and installation companies in Kiev, New York. Having all this knowledge, we're ready to implement the next scenario. A company periodically needs to create guest accounts for users who have access to only one of the two endpoints in the development unit of a hearing department, Hearing Dev Device 2. Go to the users page using the root account. Click Add User, enter guest-user1 for the username, guest-user1@acme.com for the email, and 1234 for the password, and /guest for the user directory. We place the newly created user under the /guest user directory. Now, we should create a policy that will allow access to one endpoint. For that, we need the resource ID of that endpoint. Go to Device Management and then select HVAC Demo App. Click on Heating Dev Device 2, Device from Device List, and copy its ID, which you see on the screen. Now that we've got the resource of the ID of the endpoint, we're ready to create the policy. Go to the policies page using the root account. Click Add Policy. Enter all actions on one endpoint as a name. Then click JSON View and paste the following text. Paste the following resource ID you now see on your screen after endpoint heating dev must become the following text you see on the screen. We specify specific resources in the resources and guest user directory in the principals. So let's log in under that user and verify it really has access to that one endpoint. Log in under the guest-user1 user and go to Device Management section, then Devices, choose HVAC Demo, and verify that the user has access to the Heating Dev Device 2 endpoint. All future guests under the same guest user directories will be automatically granted with the same access. So if we want to verify this, we go to the users page using the root account. Click Add User, enter guest-user2 for the username, guest-user2@acme.com for the email, password, and /guest for the user directory. Log in under the guest-user2 user and go to Device Management, Devices, choose HVAC Demo, and verify that the user has access to the Heating Dev Device 2 endpoint. This way, you can add as many guests as you want, from 10 to 1,000. Now, let us review the scenario where we want to revoke all access to all endpoints for all users working in the heating department, including its application development and support units. There are two ways of doing that. We can delete all the policies that allow access to endpoints. You probably remember from earlier, the IAM denies access if there's no explicit policy that allows it. The second option is that we can create a policy that explicitly denies access to the endpoints we mentioned. The first way isn't really convenient, as we will need to find all the different policies that allow access and delete them. And we need to roll back the permissions back to the previous state. We'll still need to create all the detailed policies from scratch. So let's stick to the second option, create an explicit deny policy. Go to the policies page using the root account. Click Add Policy. Enter Deny all actions on all endpoints in heating as a name. Click JSON View and paste the following text. We specified heating resource path for endpoints, heating user directory for principals, deny in effect, an asterisk in action that means all actions. So log in under the heating-admins1/1234 username. Go to Device Management and Devices, choose the HVAC demo app, and you can then verify that no endpoints are actually available. Now, let's talk about user management in more detail. If we log in under the Heating Department app, we won't see user management in our sidebar. So you can log in under the Heating Admin 1/1234 user. You can then verify there is no user management on the left. That's not good though, right? We want the Heating Department admin to be able to have full control over user management in his department. That is, add, delete new users and groups and manage your permissions. So we'll create a policy that will allow the admin to do that. Go to the policies page using the root account. Click Add Policy. Enter all actions on users and heating as a name. Click JSON View and then paste the following text. The policy is read as follows. It allows all actions on all users in the heating user directory for principals in the user heating admin user directory. You can then refresh the page under the heating-admin 1/1234 user. Then verify that user management appeared on the left, and in the users, only those users that belong to the heating department appear. Now, if you want to revoke user management access and heating department admins, you can either delete the previous policy or create another policy that explicitly denies it. This deny policy will be almost the same as the earlier one, but the deny will be in effect instead of allow. So just go to the policies page using the root account. Click Add Policy, enter Deny All Actions on Users in Heating as a name. Click JSON View and paste the following text. Then you can refresh the page under the heating-admin 1/1234 username. And then verify that user management has disappeared on the left-hand side. So, to conclude, what we used in the demo is user directories and resource paths. But this is only a small part of the power of IAM, which allows for the representation of tree-orientated organizational structures where permissions are mostly managed from top to bottom. So the next question might have already arisen in your mind, which is how to handle graph-orientated organizational structure with a lot of bidirectional interconnections between organizational units. That structure can be handled with the help of groups and pools, which are going to be covered in our next webinar. But for now, thank you very much for joining us today. If you have any questions or queries, please let us know and we'll be happy to answer them. And in the meantime, keep being awesome. Thank you and goodbye.